Friends is considered to be one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. Yes, again already, I told you positivity for a little bit, allusions to World War I notwithstanding. And one of the reasons that it holds that honor is that its later seasons are considered as good as any of the other seasons. Most sitcoms go through a cycle. The first season or two is a little rough around the edges while the writers and the actors figure out what the show really is and who the characters are. It's the discovery period. But then they figure it out and it's just off to the races for season 3 to 5, or sometimes 7. That's usually the golden era, but then things kind of slow down. Either the writers get a little lazy or new writers come in who don't understand the characters as deeply as the old guard. Either way, the characters' comedic idiosyncrasies become more and more exaggerated and cartoonish until the heart of the show itself is kind of gone. And then it overstays its welcome, and you have people that tell everyone don't even watch the last season. How I Met Your Mother started stronger than most shows, but it really lasted 2 or 3 seasons longer than it should have, and everyone agrees that season 9 is just dead to them. Parks and Rec is great, but season 1 is so rough that everyone says to just skip it, and then the final season is pretty universally hated. There are a handful of shows that manage to avoid this. Seinfeld has no best season. It's just awesome from beginning to end. Frasier was a little rough at first, but it managed to stay pretty strong through to the ending. Friends actually didn't avoid it at all, but it managed to overcome that shortcoming. How? A couple of ways, really. Some of them you know and a lot of people are aware of, but some I don't think many have thought of. The first and the biggest reason is it stuck the landing. Friends' ending is just about perfect. The idea to have them all move out of the apartment was a stroke of genius because as they said goodbye to that room, it felt like they were saying goodbye to us. Everyone got the perfect ending for a sitcom. The chapters of their lives that we had been following for 10 years, or in my case, binging for 2 weeks, were closed. But we also knew that their lives would continue without us, and we were very hopeful about the direction that was going to go. And that leads me to character growth. These characters all end up in different places than where we started with them. Rachel was a spoiled, lazy girl, and now she's a successful businesswoman. And she and Ross are finally together for good, and he's over his hang-ups. Chandler was a man-child with commitment issues, and now he's married with a family and just ecstatic about it. Monica is finally a mother, which is what she's wanted since the beginning of the show. Phoebe has a family for the first time in her life, and she's so happy. Joey doesn't really change. I guess he's slightly more monogamous leaning than before. Can count that. But there's a much more subtle thing that they did that I think deserves a lot more attention than it gets. You see, Friends does follow my outline. Season 1 is rough around the edges. It's not bad, but at times it's like a different show. Joey gets the most dramatic changes. He's a completely different person from the beginning to the end. But it also has a lot more serious moments than the other seasons, and it intersperses a lot of dramatic stuff throughout the show. You honestly get the sense that the creators actually wanted the show to be completely different from what it became. Season 2 is, it's fine. It's where the writers really started experimenting with what the show was rather than what they wanted it to be. They also got better lighting. Has anyone else noticed how dark the first season of this show is? Season 3 is where it hits its stride and it gets good. The characters and the humor were figured out and the show almost seemed to write itself. That era lasted until season 6. 7 is still really good, but it's where the cracks started to appear. Phoebe's random references to her past started to hit the point where you wondered how old she was, and she also started to get just a little more demented. Joey gets more dumb as the show continues. Ross's anxiety and freakouts become more and more exaggerated. Monica's controlling nature and neuroses became unrealistically strong. Rachel and Chandler stayed pretty strong as their characters had gone through the most personal growth up to this point. Now, none of this is necessarily bad from a comedic perspective. It's funny, but the comedy is only what makes you watch the show the first time. The relatability and the connectability of the characters is what makes the show last. And the more exaggerated and unrealistic characters become, the less we identify with them or their struggles, and we eventually just kind of tune out. And Friends was on the road to that ruin. You can see it coming, the beginning of the end, but most people don't notice, and those seasons aren't considered bad. And I think that it is because someone made one good decision and one genius decision. The good decision was, in season 9, they introduced the first new recurring character since Emily in season 4. Phoebe's boyfriend and eventual husband, Mike. Friends had reached a point where 2/3 of the main characters were exaggeratedly funny, and in stepped a new, fairly normal character. He does occasionally do goofy things, like when he pretends to play a piano to show that he knows how to, or gets hyper-competitive with Monica over ping pong. But for the most part, he's a normal, grounded person dealing with the crazies around him, which does a bit to show that the writers are aware that these people are nuts, and it helps them feel more real because they exist in a world where real people exist and interact with them beyond the occasional customer service representative. Guest stars and extras with larger roles have become pretty sparse at this point because we'd reached the era where this was the most expensive show ever made because of the 6 lead salaries. Reportedly, that expense alone, their salaries, made season 9 cost $138 million. Add a few directors, writers, and union contracts to that, and each episode cost an estimated $1 million on top of the stars' salaries, which brought it to $161 million. That's on par with a Disney Star Wars series, without adjusting for inflation. With that adjustment, we're at $274 million. That's more than 50% of Rings of Power Season 1's budget for a multi-camera sitcom. Anyway, I'm done with that tangent now. Mike was a breath of fresh air that grounded the show in reality for the last 2 seasons and kept it from sliding off the rails, as well as finally starting Phoebe's arc of wanting to have the normal family she'd been denied as a child. Now, this was a little risky, and it could have gone wrong. Some shows have tried this in the past, introducing a new character near the end like this, and that character usually becomes disliked. They can be boring or annoying or just not jive with the rest of the show. So, if creating Mike was the good decision, casting Paul Rudd was the genius decision. Paul Rudd drove me nuts for years because I could not figure out why he was funny. Not in a judgy, oh, why do people think he's funny way. No, I thought he was funny, but I couldn't figure out why I thought he was funny. Nothing about him is necessarily comedic. In fact, he's a pretty darn good actor, just constantly cast in comedic roles. But at the same time, you laugh at him, and I couldn't figure it out. Finally, I had an apostrophe. In the world of comedic duos, there is the clown and the straight man. The straight man's job is to be normal, while the clown goes as crazy as possible. Abbott to Costello, K to J, the brain to Pinky, etc. The clown gets most of the laughs, and the straight man acts as a calm audience stand-in. Paul Rudd is funny because he may be the greatest straight man in history. He rarely gets the punchline or the freak out or the physical comedy. His job is to set up the clown and watch the crazy. But he is so good at watching the crazy that he's frequently funnier than the clown.
I'm sorry, I've never met a boyfriend's parents before.
But, I mean, you have met humans before, right?
I won't say that there should be a Who Framed Roger Rabbit remake, but Paul Rudd would be perfect for it when it inevitably happens. Because of that, throwing him into the role of a necessary straight man against 4 crazies was perfect, because he would be more than just the straight man. He would actively contribute to the comedy of the show. I know that he's only in 16 out of season 9 and 10's 40 episodes, so he wasn't there all the time. He didn't necessarily save the show, but not every episode of any season is a winner, and you only need a handful to keep it from being a complete write-off, and the episodes that he was in help prevent that. And his character's presence spread beyond the episodes that he's in. Phoebe is in a committed relationship for a while, and that tones her down a bit. And I think having a normal person in the character list helped the writers pull back a little bit. What I'm positing can't be proven, but I do actually believe that without Mike and Paul Rudd being cast as Mike, Season 9 would be considered the first bad season, and Season 10 would then be mediocre to bad. To make it worse, I contend that the series finale wouldn't be as good without a married Phoebe, and it might not have even ended in 10. Then we would have had a bad 9, a bad 10, and the show's gone too long 11. Maybe he did save the show. Well, you'll see me next time if you subscribe. Bye.